Thanks very much, Lord Mayor. I think one of the interesting things Andrew spoke about was this sense of excitement that about the changes that took place in the city, and I think a lot of us share that, and that the changes, that the new people coming into the city, greater prominence for gay people in the city, that this is something that we're proud of, and that we see as a great achievement. But also I think that it was very important where the Lord Mayor set out the realities as well, and that while we have done very well, that there are great challenges out there for us, and part of the job, I suppose, is to understand how we have done well and how we make sure we keep on doing well into the future, and so that we can deliver that type of integrated city. Our keynote speaker here today is Professor Sean Kay, and his latest book, Celtic Revival, The Rise, Fall and Renewal of Global Ireland, was published recently. Sean is a professor in the Department of Politics and Government at Ohio Wesleyan University. He was an advisor on Europe and on Ireland to the President Obama's election campaign. He is in Ireland as part of a European tour, and I was looking at the numbers of places that he has visited, and it would make me tired anyway. And one of his ports of call is to speak at the Clinton Institute out in UCD. Alongside his many involvements and appointments, he is also a fellow of the Eisenhower Institute in Washington. So I'd like to ask you to give a warm reception to Professor Sean Kay.
Great. It's really super to be here, and I'm going to just talk for a short period of time and try to lay out some very general themes, which then I think we have a really much more distinguished panel than I can offer that would really, I hope, dig in on some of the detail, and I think really to provoke some discussion. And before I begin, I'd really like to thank the Lord Mayor for coming. It's terrific, and I owe a huge gratitude to Kieran Rose, who I interviewed for the book. Owen Collins was there too, and he's just an incredible figure in Ireland, and I think the city and the nation, and indeed the outside world, owe people like him and GLEN in particular an incredible amount of gratitude for really being the living embodiment of change, and not just change that we can talk about, but to borrow a phrase, change you can believe in. You know, and I think it's really good, and so it's a real personal privilege to do this here today. And I started doing this book after about 25 years, actually, which dates me a little bit, of coming to Ireland. My wife is from Mulhuddard, out near Clonsilla, where she grew up, and I myself, as an outsider, would come in and see, you know, every other year or two, you know, these radical changes that have gone on, especially in that area of Dublin West, and you know, where I first started going there, a sort of rural, you know, kind of land where you could get property, and then it became a lot of council housing, and now it's a very much a lively immigrant place, and so it's you know, what I hope to be able to offer in my time and visit here and occasional writings and through this book is a little bit of outside perspective on how this is looking here in Ireland today, because clearly there's not much I can write or say that you aren't all living through as it is, right? So it's not, I'm not going to sit here or stand here and talk about you know, how awful the burdensome debt is and so forth. I mean, everyone knows the harsh realities, right? And so what I've tried to do a little bit in some of my talking is to at least begin an effort to kind of redirect the narrative a little bit into a little bit different direction. I gave that talk, and a gentleman, a senior guy at the Irish Embassy in Washington, when we launched the book there in July, he stood up and as a good diplomat would do, he said, well, my only real question is, why is there a question mark after Celtic Revival? It should be an exclamation point. And I said, well, we're not quite there yet, you know, but we'll get there. And but the central argument is probably a little bit more, what's the word, nuanced, I think, you know, because when I'm talking about a Celtic revival, which is the phrase we gave to the book, I'm talking about a very different platform. And basically what I want to do in 15 minutes, no more than that here today, is to talk very briefly about how globalization played a very, very big role in Ireland, and indeed how this relates to the broader world, and then talks about some specific foundations for Ireland's renewal that I think are not only in place, but have been in place for a very long time, but if you're living in the moment, it's a little hard necessarily to see them or even appreciate how they look in the larger scope of historic change. I want to make some points, in fact, about how I think Ireland can lead the way forward in the global economy as a model for other countries. And it's not the kind of model that goes out and earns you $40,000 a speech in the United States to talk about the Celtic Tiger. That was a nuanced reference, I think, but it is the kind of speech or talk that I hope sort of changes the discussion, because none of us, whether it's the United States, Ireland, we're not going to get back to where we were, but I think we can get to a better place. And if people work together and recognize the things that are at the core, what Karen is talking about is human capital. And Francis and other economists and business leaders can talk more about how that affects them, but that's kind of at the center of this. And at the core of that is diversity. And then finally, I'll conclude with some quick lessons for the United States. Now, the main thing I would say about globalization is it's important to note that Ireland has been a leader in globalization for a very long time now. It really goes back to the 1960s at least, but if you go back even historically, how you measure and define globalization is about the movement of people and people going out into the world, whether they had to for historical reasons or not. But Irish have been on the move for a long time. They've been pathbreakers on globalization. And, but even on the economy, as Garrett Fitzgerald reminded me when I interviewed him last summer, this Celtic Tiger, it didn't emerge overnight, and it's important to view it in a larger sense of progress. The historian R.H. Foster pointed out in 1970, for example, 25% of 200,000 industrial jobs in Ireland were the result of foreign direct investment. And yet, while Ireland would be ranked as the most globalized economy in the world, by the time the Celtic Tiger really kicked in, the additional outside foreign direct investment was only about 7% of the additional growth that was going on at the time. So it actually was pretty much leveled off by about 2001. And so this is important because obviously what happened, as you know, was that there was a desire to continue these high rates of growth, but through a whole different pattern of progress. And so that's why it's important to note globalization not only didn't cause the Celtic Tiger to go bad, but it was at a core element, a foundation of it. But it wasn't the crucial thing either that was leading to the development of Ireland. As many people in the United States said, for example, in particular, Tom Friedman, who I write about, he's a journalist, a columnist for the New York Times. And he wrote a very famous book about globalization, and The World is Flat, he called it. And I know about this book because it's assigned all over. High school kids read it in America. It's college, university students read it. My daughter was assigned to read it, and we were traveling across Kansas on the way to Colorado, and she was talking to me all about it. And I said, yeah, this is really flat, and long too, and you're still talking about Tom Friedman. But the fact is, some people got Ireland really wrong, and with some huge consequences, and Tom Friedman was one of them, and I kind of stick with him because he really argued that the Celtic Tiger Ireland of about 2005 should have been the model for the world. And we were watching this in the campaign in the United States during 2008, and Senator McCain was saying, just as the world was kind of collapsing, that the United States should be more like Ireland, And when I give this talk to an American audience, I have to spend more time sort of explaining, the Celtic Tiger and how it collapsed and all that, and what's happened since. But I tell them that if you put the American economy in proportion to the size of the bailout here in Ireland of the banks, it would have cost us the equivalent of $30 trillion. And when I say that, there literally are gasps in the room. So there's a sense of of size here. But But if that was the model for the world, then I'm not sure he got it quite right. And it is just speaking as an academic, I mean, part of the problem was, for example, when he wrote about Limerick and Dell Computers, he was just exchanging emails with the CEO of Dell. That's not how you do real research. Had he actually gone to Limerick and spent some time there, he would have known that even at the height of the Celtic Tiger, it had, fundamental problems with unemployment. And, if you go there now, as I'm going there in 2 days, it's a place with challenges, and it was then too. That's the main thing. And so that's why, a lot of this was being missed. But he said, and I quote him in the book as saying, when I think about countries like Ireland, I get a little tear in my eye, and no apologies, right? And so part of my view is, well, there's nothing wrong with being wrong about these things, but it was problematic because he was praising the government for getting a whole bunch of different things right, and they clearly heard that and thought, well, they like it in America, so we should keep going for it, right? And at the end of the day, it didn't really work out. And a good example of that, and I'm going to come back to this when I talk about diversity in just a few minutes, was that even during the height of the Celtic Tiger, the relative investment in education was in significant decline. And this was one of the big things that Tom Friedman was pointing out was great about Ireland, was that it was generating all this new revenue, but he didn't point out the deficits were getting higher. There was a decline in spending in education, as Richard Bruton told me last summer, before he went into government, that we had been sort of dining out on this claim to education success for a long time. But now if you look at the OECD measures of it, Ireland ranks quite low. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But so the bottom line is clearly the world, Ireland got caught up in this success story of globalization. But what my argument is that it was 2001 through 2008 that was the aberration. The rest of it, before that, was building up to some very important sort of structural foundations on which Ireland can begin its renewal. And not only were they in place before, I think they were in place going back even further on the economy to the 1960s and so forth, but as well, at every moment, though, this kind of truly un-Irish quality, I think, and again, I'm just an outsider, I can say these things, but of sort of greed and materialism did drive a nation into ruin. But it was that short period of time that was the aberration. The larger picture, and I think this is what's, I hope, useful to hear if you're living through this, is one of progress and change. And I want to say what those things are. So a new platform, basically. Now, I have to say, one of the crucial things is that realism has set in here too. Now that doesn't mean it has to be negative. I mean, actually being realistic is a really good thing because you understand where you're at, right? And so if you understand that you have this extraordinary huge hill to climb, you can't even begin to climb it unless you know it's, what it is. And I have to say, my own realistic assessment is on the economy. I think it's probably likely to get worse before it gets better. I think it has to be said. I mean, the cuts are going to keep coming, and pressure is coming from that from Germany and other places. And so for people living here, it's going to be hard to see, Ireland might be praised, yeah, they're doing all these right things, but if average people aren't feeling the effects, then that's going to be harder and harder for politicians to explain and sell over time. But Ireland is doing well on that front because the outside world is seeing Ireland as being a more stable. It's not Greece, and it's not Italy. I just came back from Italy, and so that perception is important. And part of that is because of the very first thing that I think is crucial here. Ireland, the people today, and I see this again watching regularly from the outside and when I'm here, are expecting accountability now, okay, from their leaders. Accountability, not just from elected officials, but from senior civil servants, from banks, obviously. And that's important because the Irish people are also questioning the basic roles and responsibilities of living in a republic, and that's crucial. And at the core of that, it's kind of hard to explain to an American audience, but when I first started coming here in the mid-'80s, I noticed there were all these issues that, the phrase is, well, we don't talk about that, whatever it might be, whether it was the church scandal or, politics or the economy, just a whole cultural array of things that we kind of maybe talk about in hushed whispers around the corner, but we wouldn't really talk about, sort of an aversion to things. I think, if you listen to just how radio has changed and so forth, maybe they've gone too far here because a lot of it's very negative, and what you read in the press, and a lot of people I know now here just stop kind of even watching the news anymore because it's kind of discouraging. But the fact is there's nothing off the table, whether it be gay rights or multiculturalism. These are all there for discussion now. And 20, 30 years ago, if you were growing up then, it wasn't, right? Or if it was talked about, it was very quiet. And that's actually, I think, a really important thing, because what it means is that Ireland has now got the potential here to really project both maturity and calm and realism. When the Dáil passed the civil partnership legislation last year, I mean, here Ireland was more progressive than New York State at the time. Now, New York State has gone and changed since then, but that's major. That's big. And I remember being there watching it at the Dáil, and I think there were like 5 people outside protesting this bill. You know, it was so easy to pass through the Dáil, the debate. It was just understood that this is an equality thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It's good for business. You know, I come from a state in Ohio where we've literally written into our Constitution that it's illegal to have civil partnerships. So we're going backwards. You're going forwards. But that's part of a new demand for ethics, I think. And so these are kind of basic fundamental values. The second key one is this radical social change that I'm alluding to. So in America, they still tend to talk about Ireland as a conservative Catholic country, right? And when I talk about these things in the United States, people are really surprised, actually, to hear. So they need to hear more about, you know, on the outside, about how much change has gone on. Irish politicians, I think, need to get out of those old networks of Irish American communities in Boston and New York and Washington, and really get out into the heartland and talk to real people and build business ties, you know, with these cities, with these new markets, new opportunities, and really let people know the kind of change that has gone on in Ireland. I think that was kind of a missed opportunity, by the way, in President Obama's remarks here, that he really didn't draw on that and recognize the change that had gone on here in the country. And so, you know, this is, I think, a huge, you know, if you think about, for example, in the context of the church, Ireland is grappling forcefully with the church crisis. Other countries are not, and my country isn't. And that's, you know, if you're living in it, it's maybe something you come used to hearing and so forth, but it's a really big deal from the outside. And it gets covered a lot in the New York Times and places like that. And so this idea for basically truth and justice, people telling truth to power. There's many people here, actually, that I interviewed for the book, and one is Andrew Madden, who's sitting here, and I became really enamored with his speaking out on these issues. It's courageous. It's a classic Irish trait of young people speaking out, telling truth to power. And when you heard the speech of Enda Kenny to the GLEN report, that got a lot of coverage in the United States because it was seen as a very powerful statement, that this is not the Vatican, this is a republic. And so this is really important, I think, because it's really, again, the first point being about realism and a desire for ethics and transparency, but this one is really about a new face of Ireland, a progressive Ireland that needs to be sold to the outside world. The third key foundation is multiculturalism, which we've been talking about already. And it's just so amazing to see, you know, I mean, again, if you grow up in it and you watch it gradually happen. I flew in on a plane from Frankfurt the other day, and there was, you know, you can sometimes tell who the Irish folk are, and I counted maybe 5 people on that plane that looked obviously Irish to me. They were from China, they were from Pakistan, they were from Africa, Germans, you know, maybe they're tourists, who knows what they're doing, but the face of Ireland has changed permanently, dramatically. This is an extraordinary, important human capital asset, because the businesses that are going to want to come here need the language skills. They want people with global experience. I think this is the biggest thing that Ireland has going for it right now, because Germany, France, Britain have all declared we have failed at multiculturalism. Another person I interviewed for the book is Garrett Mullen. He's here, and he does this thing called Show Racism the Red Card in sport. And I know there's lots of groups like that out there. And the work does still need to be done, but Ireland is doing so much better than other countries on this. Maybe it's that spirit of welcoming or whatever, I don't know. And also the newcomer children. I mean, you're going to have tens and tens of thousands of children that come from mixed marriages. Now, when I got married here in Dublin to my wife, I was a mixed marriage because I come from a Protestant background and she's Catholic. Back in America, we would see a mixed marriage as something very different. That's happening here. And you're going to have a lot of children that are growing up and bringing these worldviews into the schools, into the communities. I know young people today that have Indians in their classrooms and Chinese in their classrooms. This is extraordinarily important. This is what has to be invested in. The fourth key point, and the last two of the foundation are obvious ones, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but obviously peacemaking in the North remains important. I'm going to speak at UCD on the weekend on this. But it still needs work, and the United States, as far as I'm concerned, has kind of turned its back on the day-to-day kind of bottom-up peace building that needs to happen in the North. But it's so much of the similar problems, basically. Too many young people, and this is true in here, it's true in the UK, it's true in the United States. Too many young people with a lack of sense of ambition, a lack of a sense of a future. These people need to be reached out to. And somebody has to do it. And they have to have a sense that there's a better future ahead of them. And of course, it's dangerous in the North if that lapses into some of the places where 40% of the violence actually happened. But still, peacekeeping, peace, okay? This is really important. And the last one I'd say is often forgotten about here, or not thought about enough, but Ireland's foreign policy is a masterful blend of national interest and idealism. And so the long tradition of, going back to the United Nations in the 1950s of Ireland being a major architect of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I tell my friends that do nuclear bombs and stuff in America about that, and they say, wow, I didn't know that. I said, neither did I found it out. But this is big. Ireland is selling goodwill. That's the key point, right? So if you add those 5 things together, from desire for transparency and accountability, truth, justice, social change, multiculturalism, peace, and goodwill all together, these are the important foundations. Frankly, they're much more important to attracting future investment than whatever the corporate tax rate is. And I have a few things to say about that in a minute. But these are the things that really matter, I think. And these are the things that you all are doing here in Dublin. And it really does require also, though, a really targeted strategy of selling it. And that's where I have to, kind of leave it to you all to figure out how best to do that. But I just want to talk for a couple more minutes here because I think the panel is much more important, and as is your comments. But one thing about the foreign policy, I would say, is Irish diplomats really do need to get beyond that nexus that I was talking about, especially in the United States. They have to get out of that Irish-American sort of network. Now, that's not going to make me popular with a lot of Irish-American friends back in the States, but they have to get out to the heartland, like where I'm at in Ohio. And I'm thinking about one of the big things that Ireland has as an opportunity is wind and wave energy. And I said on Ohio, which has Lake Erie, we tried to push that when President Obama was here, that he should include a joint statement on research and development for wind and wave energy. I must say, I thought it was a tremendous visit. It went very well. I think maybe the Queen accomplished more by saying less, actually. But I thought it was a really good visit and so on. But 20 minutes of policy discussions is not going to accomplish much. There wasn't a real policy agenda there, and I think that was a missed opportunity, so I think that needs to kind of be rebuilt again. Now, just a couple more minutes, let me say one more thing about how Ireland can lead the way, and then I'll conclude. Again, not going into what's happening, the outside perception of Ireland, even though right now it's seen as a positive place in the sense that it's more stable than other places. Clearly, when you have Moody's downgrading and the need to renegotiate the bailout rates and so forth, this is not. There still is a huge perception problem that Ireland will be a difficult place for investment for some time to come. Clearly, the budget cuts are going to continue to deflate the economy for a long time. So it's going to be very hard. And what you need is indigenous growth. You need manufacturing. You need to create jobs. That's the problem. And the FDI that's here is really important for jobs. But that's not going to bring the economy back. It's only adding a few thousand, I think 7,000 or so in the last year. That's not enough when you have 450,000 people unemployed. You need much more. You need to stimulate the economy somehow. So just from my perspective, it seems to me that 3 things need to happen here. You need to figure out a way to get the capacity to invest in some of the key assets that are here. And you need to figure out a way to do that. And the only things that Ireland has really are how it chooses how to spend and tax, you know, and given where it's at right now. And so it needs to renegotiate this big loan. It has to be, in my view, a much longer period of time. When I hear celebrity economists talk about defaulting or you know, walking away from the Eurozone, they also don't then tell you how really, really bad that would be for Ireland if it did that. You know, I mean, it would be really painful, really difficult. It's not realistic in the slightest, okay? So then the other option, as my father-in-law used to say, if there's going to be chaos, at least let it be organized. So in my own view, you need a much longer term bailout of maybe 30 years and 2%, but that will lead to very flat economic growth unless there's some kind of investment. And here's the key thing, you have to generate revenue. This 12.5 corporate rate, it doesn't come often from Americans to hear this, because the American Chamber of Commerce in particular continually makes these points, but that's not a magic number. It could have been set at 15%, it could have been, you know, so there is room to play with that. But the main point I'd make about the corporate tax rate here is that that's Ireland's decision. It's not right for France to say what it should be, and it's not right for the United States to come in and say, you must keep it as it is. This is Ireland's sovereignty, Ireland's choice. And if Ireland decides that it should go up and there's a reason for benefit, then it should do it. But that's not for me to say, that's not for the American ambassador to say, that's not for France to say. But if you need to generate revenue and you can figure out a way to persuade the businesses that you can lower operating costs over a period of time and create jobs here and grow the economy, and in particular figure out new ways to create public-private and big-time investment, not just for the development of wind and wave energy here in Ireland, but for the export of it, then I think there's a real foundation there for economic growth. But the 12.5 is not going to be a magic number, I don't think. And the main thing I caution about it, and then I want to say one more thing about education, and then I'll wrap up if that's okay. The caution I'd say is you know, I was asked in the radio interview a couple weeks ago here about comments that a woman running for president, Michelle Bachmann, said about American businesses here in Ireland. I gave a talk the other day in Italy, and I referred to as Sarah Bachmann, and which is obviously conflating Sarah Palin and Michelle Bachmann, but it's when Sarah Palin sounds like the reasonable and responsible one, then you know you've come a long way in politics. But Michelle Bachmann made a comment, you probably heard it, that you know, immediately if America gave a tax holiday, we could pull 100,000 jobs out of Ireland, which would obviously decimate the country. I mean, this would be horrible, right? She doesn't care. And quite frankly, I would not dismiss what she's saying just because she seems like one of these Tea Party. I think that opinion is going to be a very popular one in Congress, even maybe in the White House. They're looking at ways, clearly they're politicians and they have a problem in America. They're not thinking about what jobs they can create in Ireland right now, even in the Irish American caucus in Congress. These are not people that are going out and lobbying for jobs for Ireland. They're lobbying for jobs in their district, right? So if all Ireland is left after that is saying, here's our 12.5%, come here, then that's not going to sell much. What Ireland really has to sell is those foundations that I was mentioning before, because what you really have to, I think, be thinking about is the future investment. The 12.5 has become this kind of thing that can't change, but I think that's very backward looking. And I just see it more as symbolic more than anything at this point. But somehow revenue has to be raised. But if you can persuade the future companies that you can lower operating costs, and they're already doing well enough because the salaries have gone down quite a bit, so they're productive, they're doing fine, but a lot of that money, of course, doesn't come into Ireland. So, and at the core of that, I've mentioned, I think, is this huge asset of the future world's energy supply that you're sitting on, of wind and wave technology. Now, two last points, and I'll just take 2 minutes and I'll be done here. On the multiculturalism front, at the core of this is two things. Obviously, a young Irish person today grows up with a different Ireland than my wife would have known and that I saw coming here 25 years ago, and that's huge. Now, what worries me though is the language training that's going on here for Irish people, whether they need to emigrate or whether they're going to work for these companies that you might want to attract for the future. And I know there's been a debate here, should you be learning Chinese, Mandarin, and so forth? And the answer is yes. You need to be. And yet, if you look at the OECD statistics, you probably know this, Ireland ranks, is I think the only country in the EU that doesn't have a mandatory required foreign language requirement. That's really bad news. I mean, that is undermining your human capital of the future. From my point of view, respectfully saying, really needs to change. So when these multinationals are looking at global markets, they're really looking for global citizens. And if you don't have the language skills, it used to be the asset to be the only English-speaking country in the EU. Now it needs to be the asset that you have global languages. It's vital to Ireland's future. And right now, it's not happening. I think it's stunning to me that only 8% of Irish secondary students learn 2 or more foreign languages, while the European average is 60%. That's not going to attract future investment. And the last thing I'd say about education is so key to this, is that you have this idea of a smart economy. It's a good idea. It's a very good idea, I think. But what really needs to happen is improvement at the secondary level of education. And as you all know very well, we see it in the papers, the math skills, the science skills, and the language skills, of course. And so at the end of the day, Ireland can capitalize, I think, less so on the smart economy and much more on the educational strengths that are there, but not in a way that you're going to attract a lot of big high-end, like Silicon Valley type things. What I would be going for if I were you, and this is key to Dublin, I think, and other cities as well, and this will be the last point, and then I'll conclude, is that you really need to work on that pipeline up into the smart economy. And the way to do it is, I think, well, one key way to do it is to spend a lot more focus on attracting international students to come here to study. The United States brings in $13 billion a year of foreign students that come there, they get their education there, many of them stay, they help grow the economy, we have to import in America, 39% of jobs that require a PhD are held by foreigners. We import our smart people. And right now we're importing a lot of smart Irish people. That's not good for Ireland, though, as you know. And so you need Irish people rebuilding Ireland as well as this international society. And so at least if I could envision a positive future, Ireland could really literally see itself as a globalization hub for higher education learning, bringing people in. Right now it's very expensive, quite frankly, with tuitions and fees for outsiders to come here and study. And that's something that really could, I think, be invested in and changed. So the real challenge is, just to conclude, how do you figure out how to develop investments in these real assets at a time when there's no money, right? And now that's where the politicians have to make choices. They have to look at these things, and they have to think about this big picture, and I think stop thinking about, like, where are we right now, and lay out a very clear vision of Ireland's future as to what we want to look like in 5 to 10 years, and identify these assets and make it clear that this is what the nation needs. In my view, Ireland needs something as big as like a moonshot, and like when we Americans sent our people to the moon. It may not have even been cost effective or all that, but it united a country around a common objective. It gave a spirit of something that everyone could have a little piece of either aspiration or hope for. That's something that I do find missing today in Ireland. I think there's a lot of people scattered and kind of looking after the day-to-day, and with good reason. So that's where the government, I think, at the end of the day, really does need to lay out a much bigger vision, whether it be on the wind and wave technology or maybe there's other things, but this has to be the future. Now, so the bottom line is, the question, I think, is not, as Barack Obama said in Gaelic when he was here, yes, we can. I think the right question is, will we? Will we do the things that we need to do in America and Ireland that can really develop a positive future for our countries? And I'll leave you with one last note. I had a little friendly competition to pick the name for the book, and we didn't use it, but it's how the book ends. I quoted a little girl that I know called Anna Lyons out in County Clare, and a lot of the suggested names came back with some rather foul language about the IMF or this and that. And I said, well, let's not do that. And she came back with the truth that only a 10-year-old could come back with. And she said that you should. We didn't use it, but it was the right way to conclude. And she said you should call the book "The Great Country Known as Ireland." And that's the spirit that we have to get back to. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sean, that was a brilliant and inspiring address, and I think there's a huge amount of food for thought, for practical thought there for us as a city council, and for everybody in the city, and at a national level as well. And it's great to see that the Lord Mayor has been able to stay, because again, it's feeding into that whole thinking that's going on in the city about how do we drive economic recovery. And it's very interesting that a lot of the things that Sean mentioned, the City Council is pursuing and is prioritising, and especially the one of international students. And that was a lovely phrase as well, the one global markets, and for global markets we need global citizens. And when Sean spoke about the need for us to learn Chinese, I would just like to tell you that the Lord Mayor is leading the charge on that, and because the Mayor of Beijing was over last weekend, and over I think about 20 minutes the Lord Mayor's knowledge of Chinese went from 0 to way up, and the translator, the teacher, was delighted and thrilled with him.